Picture someone separated from their group. Not exiled, not abandoned, just separated. A few valleys away, after a bad day and a wrong turn. They are healthy, capable, and carrying everything they need. And they are, in the most practical sense possible, already dying. Not tonight, and maybe not this week. But nothing about a human being is built to work alone, and every hour they stay separated, the odds move against them in a direction that does not reverse. That sounds dramatic, until you look at what a person actually loses the moment they are on their own, item by item. Because it is not one loss, but 5 running simultaneously. They lose defense. A human being alone is a slow, soft animal with no claws, no armor, no meaningful speed, and no natural weapon of any kind. And the only thing that ever made our species formidable to anything was numbers and coordination. A group that could surround, throw, shout, and fight together in a way no individual ever could. They lose the ability to survive an injury. A broken ankle inside a group is a difficult few weeks of being fed and carried and waited for. The same broken ankle alone, 3 valleys from anyone, is very often simply the end because nothing in the landscape pauses while you heal. And there is no way to gather food or reach water on a leg that will not hold weight. They lose food security, which is subtler and just as fatal. Hunting and gathering are unreliable day to day, and always have been. You fail often, and the entire system only works because when you come back empty-handed, somebody else did not, and the food gets shared out. Remove the sharing, and every bad day becomes a hungry day, and a run of bad days becomes something worse. They lose sleep, in the most literal sense, because there is nobody watching over them while they are unconscious. And they lose any reproductive future whatsoever, which over a lifetime means that even a person who somehow survives alone has left nothing behind. None of those 5 are inconveniences. Each one is independently lethal on a long enough timeline, and a separated person is running all 5 at once, every day, with no way to address any of them except by finding other people. So for a species built the way ours is, being alone was never a mood, or a preference, or a temperament. It was a countdown. Which brings us to the thing your body does about it, and to the reframe that changes how this feeling makes sense. Loneliness is not really an emotion. It's an alarm. Your body produces it the same way it produces hunger, thirst, and pain. As a deliberately unpleasant signal designed to make you do one specific thing. Hunger says, find food. Thirst says, find water. Pain says, stop doing that immediately. And loneliness says, get back to the group. Notice what all 4 of those have in common. None of them are pleasant, and this is the part that matters. None of them were ever supposed to be. A signal you could comfortably ignore would be a completely useless signal. Hunger that felt mildly interesting rather than urgent would not get anybody fed. Pain that registered as a neutral observation would not stop a hand on a hot stone. The unpleasantness isn't an unfortunate side effect of the alarm. The unpleasantness times the alarm, and its intensity is calibrated with some precision to how serious the underlying situation is, which tells you something rather stark about how dangerous isolation actually was. Loneliness is not a mild feeling or a passing mood. At full strength, it is genuinely awful, capable of crowding out almost everything else a person is thinking about, capable of driving people to decisions they would never otherwise make. And that intensity is not arbitrary. It is a direct measurement, written into your body, of how lethal it once was to be alone. Now here's where it gets more interesting, because this alarm is measuring something quite specific, and it isn't what most people assume. It is not counting people. If loneliness were simply a proximity detector, a system that checks whether other humans are nearby, and quiets down when they are, then being in a crowd would fix it. Being in an office would fix it. Living in a dense city, surrounded by thousands of people at all times, would make loneliness essentially impossible. Obviously, it doesn't work that way. And the reason is that proximity was never the relevant variable. What mattered to your ancestors was never how many humans happened to be within 100 meters of them. It was whether they were embedded in a specific group of specific people, who knew them by name and history. People who would share food with them during a bad stretch, who would stand with them if something went wrong, who would carry them if they were injured, and who would notice and care and come looking if they failed to return one evening. That is the thing that actually kept a person alive. Not the presence of human beings in general, which was often a threat rather than a comfort, but the presence of humans, bonded to you, with obligations running in both directions and a shared history behind them. So that is what the system evolved to detect. And it is worth stating precisely. Not contact, but connection. Not how many people you can see, but how many people would come looking. And once you understand that distinction, loneliness in a crowded room stops being a paradox and becomes something much more uncomfortable and accurate reading. The alarm is not confused, and it is not malfunctioning, because a lot of people happen to be nearby. There are human beings in every direction, and not one of them is bonded to you, which, from your body's point of view, is a situation carrying all of the danger of genuine isolation, while providing none of the obvious cause. So, the system does exactly what several 100,000 years of selection built it to do. It sounds the alarm, and it keeps sounding it. Now, what does that alarm actually do to a body? Because it isn't only a feeling, and the physical effects are where the design becomes visible. Chronic loneliness produces measurable changes, elevated stress markers, disrupted sleep, immune function that shifts, over time, in ways that resemble a body under sustained threat. Increased vigilance, a tendency to scan for danger, to read ambiguous situations as hostile, to startle more easily. Read as a list of modern symptoms that looks like damage. Something going wrong, a system breaking down. Now read exactly the same list as a description of a human being alone on an ancient landscape, and watch every item flip from symptom to solution. A sustained stress response is entirely appropriate when a person is, in fact, in continuous danger with no relief in sight. The body is mobilizing for a situation that genuinely requires mobilizing. Heightened vigilance and constant threat scanning are not paranoia, but simple necessity, because there is nobody else watching the tree line. And every ambiguous shape in the grass genuinely does need to be evaluated immediately by the only pair of eyes available. And the tendency to read unfamiliar people as potentially hostile, which looks so corrosive and self-defeating in a modern life, was straightforwardly sensible in a world where a stranger encountered alone, without your group standing behind you, without numbers, without anyone who would avenge you, was a genuinely dangerous proposition in a way. That same stranger simply was not when you met them among your own people. And then there is the sleep, which is the detail that gives the entire design away. Inside a group, sleep is safe. Somebody is always half awake, the fire is being tended through the night, and there are bodies arranged between any sleeper and the dark. Alone, going fully unconscious for 6 or 7 unguarded hours is very close to the most dangerous thing a person could possibly choose to do. So, a lonely body sleeps lightly, surfaces often, and never fully settles into the deep stages. That is not insomnia understood as a malfunction. That is a body correctly refusing to render itself completely helpless in a situation it has assessed, accurately, by its own ancient standards as unguarded. The system is not broken, and it is not overreacting. It is doing precisely what it should, based on a reading of the world that used to be entirely reliable, which raises the obvious question: why can't we just turn it off? Because of who our ancestors were? Imagine 2 variations of an early human, standing side by side. The first one finds separation from the group mildly unpleasant, noticeable, certainly, but manageable, the kind of discomfort a person can sit with. They can go off alone for a stretch without much distress, and sometimes they do because it is easier than dealing with a disagreement, or because a hunt took them further than expected, and turning back felt like effort, or simply because nothing was pulling hard enough to bring them home. The second one finds separation unbearable. Not inconvenient, genuinely intolerable, a feeling that climbs and keeps climbing, and dominates everything they are thinking about until it is resolved. That person, after a wrong turn or a bitter argument or a hunt that ran long, does not settle comfortably into solitude and let the days accumulate. They turn around. They walk back. They repair the relationship, they apologize when they would rather not, they accept a compromise they would otherwise refuse. Because every one of those things is easier to bear than the feeling of being outside the group. Now ask which of those two has descendants. The second one, overwhelmingly and repeatedly. And this same sorting ran for hundreds of thousands of years in every human population on every continent, under the same conditions, producing the same result each time, because the people who could tolerate isolation comfortably tolerated it right up, until something in the landscape found them alone, and their lines simply stopped there. Every single person alive today is descended from the ones who could not stand it. The pain is not an accident in our design or a flaw that slipped through. It is the specific reason our design exists at all. So come back now to the world you actually live in and to why this ancient alarm behaves so strangely in it. You are almost certainly in more contact with more humans than any ancestor of yours could have imagined. Messages arriving constantly. Faces in feeds, crowds on the street, colleagues in a building, a phone that connects to essentially everyone. And none of that is what the system measures. Your body isn't asking how many people you interacted with today, or how many messages arrived, or how many faces went past. It's running the old check, the same one it has always run, in the same order. Is there a group I belong to? Are there people who would notice if I disappeared for a week? If something went badly wrong tomorrow, is there someone who would actually show up? When the answers to those questions come back thin, the alarm fires. And it fires times accurately, which is the uncomfortable part, because those three questions still matter enormously. It doesn't matter in the slightest that the predators are gone. The underlying condition the alarm is detecting being unbonded, being nobody's particular responsibility, is still a real and serious situation for a human being to be in. Now, an important note, and it needs to be said clearly rather than tucked away. Understanding the mechanism is not the same as fixing the problem, and this video is not a treatment for anything. Persistent loneliness is genuinely serious. It has real effects on health and well-being, and it is not something to simply endure, because it turns out to be evolutionarily ancient. If it's a sustained feature of your life, rather than a passing feeling, that's worth taking seriously and worth talking to somebody about, whether that's a person you trust or a professional. The point of the ancient explanation is narrow and specific. It's this: the feeling is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It's a functioning alarm doing its job. But an alarm going off is a reason to respond, not a reason to feel reassured and carry on. So the answer to when ancient humans first started feeling lonely is, in the end, a slightly deflating one, essentially always. Long before there were humans at all, in fact, any social animal that depends on its group for survival needs a mechanism that punishes separation, and ours has been running for a very long time. What has changed is the environment it's reading. For hundreds of thousands of years, an alarm this loud was almost never triggered without cause. Because if you felt disconnected from your group, you very probably were, and the situation could be resolved by walking back toward the fire. There was somewhere obvious to go. Now, the same alarm can sound in a full building, and it isn't lying to you. It's telling you the truth about something real in a world that has made that something much easier to lose and much harder to rebuild. You didn't develop a modern affliction. You inherited an ancient warning system, still working exactly as designed, still pointing at something that still matters. If you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. We make videos like this one every week about ancient human behavior, about what your body still remembers, and about the gap between the world you were built for and the one you actually live in. If that is something you want more of, hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm that this kind of storytelling is worth keeping alive. See you in the next one.